Hello, hello. Welcome to an interview with a very special guest. You guys are about to hear from Shawn Slade, who is both deep into the academic realm. We're going to talk to him about his dissertation, his Ph.D., his thesis around nature connection and forest therapy. But of course, we will also be digging into that practical and an inspired side that Shawn lives, which is a man connected to nature who just loves nature and is outside as much as he's inside in the books, in the world of academia. So welcome to the show, Shawn.
Thanks very much. It sounds like you've been spying on me and you know that I haven't been outdoors other than this fresh tan, I guess I'm sporting, but yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're connected through social media and love listening to your podcast as well. You've had some good topics on recently. So before we get started, I want to let people know how they can connect with you. So Rewild My Bio. You can go to rewildmybio.com. You can also check that out on Instagram and then all the kind of major podcast platforms too, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
So Shawn joins us from London, Ontario. So a fellow Canadian. He's at, is it West? What's the name of the university you're at again?
So I'm at Western University in London, Ontario. Yep.
Yeah, cool. So this will be fun. I mean, obviously, you and I, we come, and anyone watching comes from this place of having that nature connection, right? Just that feeling, that inspiration. I always say, like both my parents are raised atheists, but it raised me I never even heard the word God until I was like much older, but we always had this sense, this connection to nature, this reverence, that was our church, and still is today. And so we all have that, we can feel that. But what's interesting is that you've taken this to kind of the academic level, right? And here you are, you're getting your PhD on nature connection. And maybe let's just kind of start there, and then we'll just kind of branch out and see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Nature connection is, it sparked my interest through my own healing journey, I guess you could say. So I owned a kombucha company for a number of years here in Ontario, started that with my ex-wife. So when going through a divorce, obviously a company that you both own, half of it gets split, right? So, or it didn't get split. In this case, I was bought out. And in that process though, of me kind of just waiting for this, due process to, take its process, I guess. I found myself in the woods, about 10 acres of Carolinian forest here in southwestern Ontario. It was the place I grew up. It was my parents' home. So I was back with parents. And through that process, having always loved nature, my interaction with nature was much more that of, say, more like domination and control, right? I grew up on a farm, farming potatoes and tobaccos with my grandfather. And I always loved nature, but always had this kind of weird paradox where I was this child of the 80s that really liked video games and air conditioning and staying in the shade and things like that. So it always seemed like work to me. And it really wasn't until that time where I got to spend in the woods. And then, of course, having, long practice as a personal trainer and holistic lifestyle coach, I had helped many people with natural medicine and natural health modalities, right? Everything from exercise to healing digestive disorders. So I've always been, or at least in the last decade or so, I've been keen on natural health and natural medicine, but never did I have to take such a big dose of it myself. And after doing that, it really kind of, it awoken something in me. And it really was the merger of, me always loving, say, evolutionary biology and, just being keen on that from like a personal trainer kind of primal paleo point of view is the way I always had worked with clients anyways. And that was that time in the woods kind of united that aspect, the love of science, but then also this awe and mystery, as you say. It's kind of like a church, right? So that's where I really found my church, I guess you could say there. And that was through a experience that I had in a vision quest during that time. I spent 4 days and 4 nights fasting from all things familiar in the woods. And in that time, I started to use the word God for the first time, because leading up to then, I considered myself spiritual, sure, raised Christian, but never did I really use the word God. I'd use spirit or great creator or the universe. And after that time, everything kind of crystallized for me, and I realized where I needed to go forward. And that was back to helping people. So, removing myself from the business and all things like that. I was able to purchase acreage in the Canadian Shield here in Northern Ontario. And my PhD is very much a part of what's to come from this land and essentially getting people to connect with nature, right? So helping them through forest therapy and other forest healing modalities and just nature connection techniques. But for me, yeah, really, it's been a not like me, as I should say, unlike many academics who just study things in the books. I do try to get myself out there, and I definitely walk my talk when it comes to nature connection. Not so much in the recent maybe months here writing this paper, in all honesty, but honestly, it's been unique to kind of get to this point now where I'm looking at things academically and yeah, looking at some of the stuff on how our perception, so nature connection is how we or our subjective experience of connection or a relationship with the natural world. So whether or not we see ourselves as part of it, or, you know, kind of separate from it, right? And I think for me anyways, having gone through that journey that I just explained, I really do realize that we are a part of nature, but there is that wrestle, that paradox that we always kind of find ourselves in. We're always, I find, pushing the edge, so to speak, on what's, you know, comfortable for you, but at the same time allows us to immerse in nature to receive not only the healing benefits, but a different relationship and a different respect for nature. And then we start engaging in the rest of the world differently, I find. And so it's been, yeah, so that's been my journey. And right now I'm in that kind of in between phase of, yes, writing, but also getting back to the land and connecting and trying some of these things that I'm reading about. So it's, yeah, it's been an exciting ride for sure.
Cool, right on. And I think, you know, you talk about that balance, right? I think that is the space to be in, right? Like you and I were raised of a generation, and you know, probably the kids today are even more so, where they're inside, they're stuck on, you know, computers and video games and whatever it is. And I don't think it's about kind of, you know, ignoring the world of modern technology, but finding that balance, right? To making sure
Right.
that we have just as much of a connection outside as we do with like living in the world. Like, sure, we
Mhm.
can all just go retreat and be, you know, forest hermits and, you know,
Right.
nature immersed and just forget about modern world and technology. But I don't think that's the space that we're meant to embody.
Yeah.
Nor is it kind of this path of just purely intuition, nor is it the path of just pure intellect and academia. It's
Mhm.
that blending of the two. So
Yeah.
I think you're on the right path.
Well, it's a delicate line, especially when you are studying it academically. And I spend, you know, a good 40 hours a week doing this as a day job, right? And I see studies coming out. And as I kind of mentioned before we got on, it was so this paper that I wrote is a scoping review of about 12 different interventions that were using nature contact or engagement with nature and just to basically measure their levels of nature connection, but also measure different health and well-being outcomes, right? So I find in this research, though, a lot of studies are, as you mentioned, kind of going down this route of almost using nature, much like we would use a pill to lower our blood pressure. We're kind of getting into this dose, which of course there's benefit in knowing how much nature and what type of nature and what activities are beneficial. But I think, again, going down this path of usury and kind of separation and like, how can we use nature for our health rather than blending, again, like we're talking about blending the heart and the head, so to speak, but blending, you know, this in with society, because yeah, technology is not going anywhere, and I like being able to talk to you here on, you know, provinces away, but like that's just it. It's a fine line. So as I start to, you know, talk more about nature's benefits, I'm cautious in, you know, overselling it, one, and two, in defining nature, because it's really tricky to what you call nature might be different than my nature, right? Growing up in a rural area, what a, you know, someone from an urban area would call nature, I'd be like, this is, gosh, this is not nature to me, right? So having lived in a city, I had to kind of retrain myself as to what is nature, right? So I understand there's a spectrum. Most of the world lives in urban centers, and I think the World Health Organization or UN and that believe that by 2050, 80% of the world will live in cities, right? So these opportunities to connect with, you know, deep nature, and it truly is an extinction of experience in some ways, because we're spending more time online, and then these places that I'm speaking about, they're harder to get to. You know, they're being destroyed or taken over, you know, by continued consumption. So it's an interesting time to be studying something that seems so kind of one of those new old concepts that, you know, nature is good for us, but how do we blend that in and you know, I guess respect the nature that we are, right? So yeah.
Yeah, incredible. What are some of the, you know, as you mentioned this term like nature therapies, forest therapies. what does that look like? I mean, I've heard of the term of forest bathing, you know, as kind of a technique, as a practice. And of course, and so many of us have just gone out and wandered into the forest. Like, you know, in that whole range of practice, what does that look like on kind of a, you know, informal side? All of us probably have done this, but if we were to kind of explore it in a more formal context and what you've seen in the studies, what does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. There definitely is a spectrum. And that's why, I mean, for my PhD, I've decided to rest my attention on the specific forest therapy that is conducted by ANFT. So the American, or the Association of Nature and Forest Therapists. And then there's the Network, which is the Guild of International Forest Therapists. And these are more kind of scientific, if you will, modalities of forest bathing or forest therapy, essentially. So forest therapy did originate in Japan, and they call it Shinrin-yoku, which translates to forest bathing. And yeah, again, the Japanese research kind of really has kind of taken a more scientific approach, where they're looking to measure, say, specific biomarkers, right? So a lot of the Japanese research, you'll see measuring cortisol levels with, you know, saliva pre and post walk. They're measuring blood pressure at different parts throughout the whole process. And within that process, there are different aspects, where I believe it's made up of 5 specific stages, where at one point you're doing like a sit spot, at another point you're like engaging with a tree and the smell and the senses, and then you're even finishing with normally I think it's like a pine needle tea, if I'm not mistaken, and that kind of finishes and closes out which is normally a group therapy session, or it can be done one-on-one as well. So that's kind of like the extreme, more formal side, if you will. But as you mentioned, yeah, like engaging with nature or engaging with the forest setting in a mindful way, right? So if you're keen on mindfulness meditation, taking all those principles of non-judgmental awareness and you know, non-striving, things like that, and taking that into the woods and just kind of holding that and making that your meditation is kind of the other end of more informal, right? So I think the main thing is that engaging the senses, right? And then a lot of times with nature connection specifically, and this is what my research here hopes to look at a little bit more, is how does that the nature connection piece, or how does forest therapy lend itself for us to kind of psychologically, emotionally, and experientially connect with nature, right? So by that, I mean, with the contact piece, being in nature obviously allows us to increase our nature connection, because you're there in nature, you're in a beautiful setting or what have you, and you know, you're in a comfortable setting. Whereas the other 2 pieces, cognitively and emotionally, those are the 2 pieces I think that forest therapy lends well to, because forest therapy does ask the participant to very much engage and be aware of their feelings in the moment while they're interacting with the tree, or while they see a bee buzz by or what have you, right? So I find that when you are looking at using you know, the forest as therapy or as medicine with a trained professional, I think it's very beneficial for a whole lot of mental, you know, poor mental health and different aspects, I think, that we're all kind of dealing with in the last year. I think there's been a lot of research coming out talking about lockdowns and the need for nature, and how people are actually finding a lot of, you know, a lot of space for healing and rest, and, you know, get away from the noise, if you will. So I think that, yeah, forest therapy is just it's, again, it can be practiced any which way, but I think it's neat to see how just going into the forest on our own without a therapist and just being mindful, being present, being aware, how much that can actually influence health and well-being.
Totally. And you mentioned, you know, the kind of lockdown madness, my words included, which I know you agree with, of the last, you know, year and a half. I mean, I think this is one of the values, right? Like, we all know, like, okay, you know, forest, nature, connection, there's an intuitive, heart-centered space. But, you know, when you go through this kind of, you know, bureaucracy of what we've experienced, like the more kind of science and data of like, this is important, this is why people should leave their homes, this is why people should be, you know, allowed out, is part of the therapy. I can see, you know, that type of academia and science and research, you know, being so helpful in weighing influence. Like, we all know it, but it's like, was that recommended? No, you know, like, it was the total opposite.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could add to that too, because part of that is, as someone right now who is writing papers and seeing how papers that get published in scientific journals get kind of bended and twisted every which way, when looking at these studies that I reviewed, I mean, there is, when you read them, you see that sentiment and the kind of discussions or implications that, like, it's almost like it gives the public health overlords yet another thing to kind of hold over our heads, like just like physical activity, which I've, you know, studied for years also. So it's like, I see sometimes this usury aspect of nature that kind of gets me a little bit worried as to how my paper will be, used. But like, honestly, to give examples, like there are studies that believe that it's a good idea to use simulators to simulate nature. So you're putting on a headset and it's all like, the novelty of, being in a 3D world. I guess that's kind of neat in itself, but they're comparing, let's say, like an urban environment. So control group gets an urban environment. They look around that. They are asked to kind of identify good things around them. And whereas the other people in the nature headset, like, I mean, they're not getting the sensory exposure to nature, right? It's basically they're in a room in like a laboratory setting, right? So I'm kind of critical as the way that if we're going to say nature's beneficial more so than an urban environment, I feel like we should look at real nature, look at, again, on that spectrum of like urban city park, backyard garden, deep wilderness expedition type thing, and see exactly how that impacts our nervous system, how that impacts our, if you want to do the cortisol testing or the blood pressure, things like that. I'm much more of a qualitative guy, so I'd like to get people's experience of it, because I think we can get much, again, when we're talking about nature here, it's so vast and how people define it. And for some people it's church, for another person it's a scary place with spiders, right? So I'm just, as we go forward, I'm just kind of took that on a long little rambling there. But yeah, I really do think that it's important that we, I guess, as academics, for me, I haven't interacted with any other people that study this yet. A lot of this research that I'm speaking of comes from the UK, and I look at the UK's response to, lockdowns and things like that as well. And I could see the tone as to this, like, again, more top-down approach to telling us to get outside rather than our own desire to get outside, right? So that's, yeah, it's just something I wanted to, I guess, throw in the conversation. Thought you'd find it interesting.
Well, here's another one that I've been wrestling with, and I know you have as well. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. So, a lot of people are saying, okay, we've been through this whole kind of COVID thing, which has been a limitation on freedoms, and could be some part of a larger agenda. And this idea of what's next, this was just kind of a dry run to get a condition to this idea of like climate change. And in the whole kind of, build back better and I'm describing it as a green dilemma, right? It's almost like they've hijacked these kind of like noble things of like, well, you don't want old people to die. People got to be healthy, got to be safe. It's like, well, but it's how you're going about it I disagree with. And this whole idea of, again, climate change and environmental protection, I have real concerns. I mean, obviously I'm in alignment with that in terms of maintaining ecological integrity, respect for the earth, pure water, land, forests, etc. But how it might be being used in future. I was listening to a podcast recently. It was ASH Farmer, and he was talking about, forests and, preserving forests, and all this kind of focus and attention is going into this by huge multinational companies and these large, like, world governing bodies and organizations. And it's like, basically, there's a little bit of money that goes into, say, replanting or, whatever, but most of it was going into kind of tracking and tracing and controlling, large periods of land, and this potential idea that they're going to have, nature off bounds to people because we have to preserve it. And right. I don't know, it just feels a bit, kind of tiptoey for me in terms of like, green dilemma, I'm calling it, because I'm all about those ideals, but not maybe how we're going about it or what the future might look in that regard.
I like that. I like the green dilemma, and I feel like I think, because again, it comes down to semantics, because it makes it sound like, what, you don't want to protect the environment if you're not going to support some of these initiatives, and it's like, gosh, no, quite the opposite, and it gets quite, I appreciate everything that you do and the high level truth that you bring when you create videos, because I feel like they're, well, what I should say is that I feel like some people that might subscribe to, let's say, something like carbon tax, thinking that by taxing individuals for doing things that we're essentially supposed to do in this society, that's somehow going to save the environment, right? I mean, I guess, again, I'm going to get sidetracked. I want to make sure I say this correctly, but like, to me, I think there's a way we can test for that. And what I'm finding interesting, or what a lot of this research around nature connection are these metrics that measure an individual's level of nature connection, right? So there's something called nature relatedness, and it's, again, measuring different aspects of our subjective experience or connection to the natural world. And I would argue that, and what's interesting is that nature connection is correlated with a whole bunch of different health and well-being outcome measures like vitality, purpose in life, having better overall health. It's almost as, strong an influence or indicator rather as income and education levels, right? So our level of nature connection can actually stave off mental illness, let's just say, or poor mental health. I would argue that a lot of these people that are making these assumptions about, say, carbon tax being good is that they probably would rate really low on this, right? And what's interesting is that when looking at a lot of these interventions, positive and negative effect are quite correlated with our level of nature connection. So if I'm quite connected to nature, and I go out into nature, I'm going to have a positive effect. If I'm low, I'm still going to receive a positive effect, but I'm also not as much, and it won't be as prolonged. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I feel like that our level of connection, and this is not going to be in my dissertation by any means, this is just something I like to rap about with people like yourself, but like, I feel that like our level of nature connection somewhat indicates our level of mental well-being. And I feel like a lot of these people that make these calls, if we just gave them this, these questionnaires that are validated and reliable with all these different studies, I feel like, and I'm not a questionnaire put you in a box kind of guy by any means, but I do feel like the people that are making a lot of these decisions to lock us indoors and wear masks are rating very low on the nature connection scale and maybe have mental health challenges, let's just say.
Yeah, well said. I think that's a fair, accurate statement for sure.
I'm trying to be, like, again, using the literature that I've read and being honest with my bias, but I really do feel like this is my hypothesis that I won't be testing again within the walls of academia, but it's something that I'm quite interested in figuring out, because I think that, yeah, we all have this love for nature, and right now using it to a certain agenda and again, this is, something that it's quite visible, I think, when you are connected to nature and you see certain policies that go on in the name of nature. It's blasphemy, like to someone like me, I guess. I just don't get it.
For sure. So you're probably similar to me in the sense that I feel, our best way forward, I mean, this is why you're engaged in the work that you are, to, so many of the problems of our kind of society and our current modern way of living is to get back to nature, right? Tell us a little bit more about that and that kind of path forward for yourself, but also kind of collectively as a whole, and maybe some actions that you're taking that other people can take to help move themselves and all of us forward, back to nature. Yeah,
right. It's such a big question because, it's a big question. It's an exciting question for me because, like I said, right now I am, head down in the books doing this PhD because I love learning and it helps me communicate the thoughts and things that I've got going on up here, right? But that said, I do love, working with my hands and being in nature. So it's an interesting time because, like I mentioned, I have this land up north and I'm building a house on it. So that's stage one. I've got to get up there if I want to get people on there, right? I got to have a place to get away from the nature, from the elements, and, get online and do what I got to do. So that said, the elements is the way that I believe we can all start to rekindle that relationship we have with nature that might be dormant in all of us, but I think it's all there because we are all nature. So, which again is like nature connection, our level of it, like we are nature. Again, it's just how you define it. It's funny. But anyways, through the elements. So it's been one of the most impactful teachings of my life is to kind of look at the elements as individual beings that have an essence, if you will. Because we are just that. We are made up of all the elements. So the elements: air, fire, water, earth, and then ether or space, right? And that's the kind of way that I like to look at. That's the way I kind of look at the world, is through those elements. Like which element is speaking to me in what moment? They're always there, just like, or to me anyways, they are always there, happening in our body. And I guess I should maybe give an example of this before I sound too woo and esoteric or something like that. Air, there's no better way to think about our connection to nature than air, right? Literally, like I'm breathing in, it's giving me life. I can't go very long without it, about 3 minutes or so, until I have to suck more air back in. But as I'm breathing in what trees breathe out. Like that's pretty amazing when you actually think about that. But air is like, think of a survival situation even, right? So I love the deep woods, and that's where I find to be very therapeutic and medicinal, right? And that's where I want to bring people to, because I believe there's more healing power with that awe and beauty that you get in those untouched natural places. But anyways, air, I mean, if you were to get lost in the woods, the first thing you'd want to do is stop, breathe, nice big inhalation, slow exhalation, and just take a minute, right? Get collected and figure out where you're going to go from there. And I'm not going to go in the traditional order, but at least for teaching about nature connection, water, right? Do you have water? If you've got water and you're breathing, we're doing good so far, right? And water, obviously, water carries information. I mean, water in our, like looking at, different Eastern philosophies around health and healing, water is very much tied into our emotional system, right? So when starting these relationships, we're starting to actually heal the physical body. Like I mentioned, air, right? So doing breath work in nature, I mean, that's one of my tools in my back pocket when I used to work with clients, and in the future when I will be again. But that's just it, like doing breath work, right? Slowing down our breathing, or doing some holotropic breath work, or many different forms, doesn't really matter. Just breathing in nature, we start to clear our head, right? Our breath is very much tied to our thoughts. Again, in Eastern, philosophies with different, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, our breath and our thoughts, our mental health is very related, right? So air, water, I mean, keep going, earth, obviously things like how we move our body. So exercise being important, things we put into our bodies, right? So things like animals, plants, fungi, all those things that we eat. And then you get to fire, you're thinking about how we're digesting the world around us. What fires are we lighting in our lives, right? So I've kind of get metaphorical here as we get farther and farther into the ethers, but yeah, like the fire element. I mean, most men that I, good friends and people that I've worked with in the past, like the idea of lighting a fire, it's like, oh, I'd love to get back, to nature. I'd love to come up to your land. I'd love to learn how to like light a fire, see you do your bow drill and light a fire, right? Which, I mean, we don't have to light fires with bow drills. We can just flick a Bic lighter, but the intent that goes behind fire, and to think how the fire cooks your food, the fire keeps us warm, the fire gives us infrared, therapy essentially, right? So again, things like sauna and hot cold kind of come into play here. So there's all these different lifestyle things we can do with each of these elements, right? And then ether, I mean, we are space. Our cells are 99.99% space. And I think that humbles me. I think that's the greatest thing about science, is that it can teach us humility if we practice it properly, because we don't know a whole heck of a lot. And I think my PhD has really done what it's supposed to, and has taught me the limits on knowledge within health science. And I think that's where, like you're mentioning, nature being church, for me, having awe-inspiring healing experiences where I've met God in nature, through nature. I mean, it's pure medicine, right? And so, yeah, we can do these individual, we can do like a sauna, we can do breath work, we can go on a walk, or eat food in nature at peace. Or we can just like dance with these elements, right? We can have a dance. You can, oh, that song sounds like the air. How would air move to this song, right? Or for me, my favorite thing that helped me through those rough times was sitting at a base of a tree, taking my journal and literally saying, I am air, and then expressing how air lives in me in that very moment, right? And it's, again, it might sound woo-woo or, again, far out, but it's, I mean, just because science hasn't said it does this or that for our blood pressure yet, right? But no, really, I mean, it's for me anyways, it's just like, give it a try. And I'm sure your listeners can dig something like that, right? It's a practice that, yeah, I don't do right now that much because I'm stuck indoors on my keyboard, but it really is something, if I need to reset, I can go out into nature, I can do some really deep breathing, clears my head, I can come back in, and then the words start to flow on the keyboard, right? So it makes us better at who we really are in the world, just by deepening that relationship with nature. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know. You've shared some of the practices you've had around, going to the forest, connecting with water in streams, and the sound of it. And
yeah, no, that's just it. It's yeah, water is really, like, for me anyways, talking about emotions and depression, like, I really want to say this to anybody out there right now. If you are having a difficult time with the lockdown, with the loss of a loved one, people are getting sick, you just want things to get back to normal. I find since the beginning of this pandemic, just given the fact that it's like, again, pneumonia, things resting in the lungs, people getting sick, you know, whether it be pollution, whatever is getting people sick right now. I just think that the water element right now is something that I live at the North Shore of Lake Erie, right? So I grew up in Canada's most southern town, Kingsville, Ontario, and it's right there on Lake Erie. I moved up 2 hours along the lake in Port Stanley, Ontario, just south of London. And the walks by the water, I mean, throughout the whole pandemic, there's something about, I mean, I can get sciencey about it, or I can get mystical and get a tear in my eye about it too. But like there is something about the water, whether you want to call it negative ion exchange and kind of, like de-stressing through just, again, connecting with basically the negative polarity of water can kind of just center us. And at the same time, I would explain it when I do breath work by water. And when you exhale, it really truly feels like it lifts your spirit and just kind of cleans you out, so to speak. And I mean, that's what water does for us. It's what we bathe in, right? So it's not like, that's just it. I dance between the science lingo and not, because I don't feel like we need to go there with science language and talk about negative ion exchange and how it benefits this or that, right? Like, I really do believe that we just have to go out there and experience it, right? Learning more and more about it sometimes, to me, is it makes me wonder why the heck we do it in the first place. We've gone this big, huge circle. I mean, again, in this circle, science has taught us a lot of amazing things about medicine and health. And so I guess it's all necessary, but I think to come full circle, and now here we are measuring blood pressure and that, it's, I guess it's a victory in the sense of maybe us finally getting back to nature and amalgamating that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, each of us, has our own role to play in terms of, moving the world forward. And you're on your own unique individual path. What do you see yourself doing? Kind of, you're just about to kind of in the final stages of getting your PhD. Are you going to be one of those career academics, or what is next for you? You mentioned you've got some land and maybe this idea of bringing people up there. What's that vision that you have for yourself and how you're going to contribute to the world and humanity?
Yeah, thanks for that. Because it is that time that things are starting to crystallize in that regard. And as I mentioned, I mean, I had a successful business. I have a business degree. So I've always been entrepreneurial in the sense that I've really enjoyed like local startups, grassroots movements, and especially around like holistic health and whatnot. So I've always enjoyed that, but really my passion is as a teacher, right? So you asked whether or not I'll have that tenure track position. I don't know. But as I just mentioned, it's an interesting time because we are coming full circle to this stuff, and there aren't that many people that are studying nature connection specifically and looking at that its impact on mental health, which I see that to be fruitful within the walls of academia. And that for me, I think there'll be a blend of that. So my dream vision is to have some of that, but I won't lose any sleep over it if I don't, because again, I can rest back on that entrepreneurial sense and my keen sense to help real people. Like, honest to gosh, like for me, it's right now people need help. And I had worked with people before. I went back to school to do my master's and my Ph.D. and everything to help more people, right? So I taught at Fanshawe College, and that was great. But for me, it's always kind of about helping, not to say helping more people anymore, but it's just about helping people. So whoever's in front of me, and that's what I would love to be able to do, is use that land up there. And here I'm saying the word use, but stewarding that land up there and just kind of having it facilitate healing for individuals that are keen on, approaching nature as medicine. And I mean, specifically, looking at like starting a center where it is a nature connection and forest healing center that would not only teach individuals out there how to kind of use the elements or work with the elements to create good health and happiness and vitality, but then also to help train mental health practitioners and professionals on different nature connection modalities. Because here I am walking that line of loving to just kind of go be a bush hippie and just live in the woods and help people that want to come and see me. But at the same time, I enjoy people too much, and I enjoy, I enjoy the idea of cities coming together and recreating themselves to be more connected with nature. And I believe in that, right? I'm very, very positive person in that regard. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to try to do, is find that balance for myself. But yeah, like I said, if I'm living up there, at least I could know I could just go walk in a really wicked forest whenever I want to, right? With bears and moose and all that stuff. So.
Cool. Hey, well, let's explore this a little bit further. You've mentioned this idea. You've caught yourself in saying that there's this tendency for humans to use nature, and we know in any healthy relationship, it's a balance. It's a give and a take, and there's that nice kind of flow. So we've got this kind of again tendency of humans to kind of look at nature, to use it, as you've corrected yourselves. What is that kind of optimal healthy relationship, that give and that take with nature? Like, what can humans offer? We know so much of what we can get from nature, but how do we balance that out? How do we move away from that use that you've got yourself saying a few times?
It's through that connection. It's through that relationship, I would say, that we have with nature. Because think of a relationship you have with a person, mom, dad, brother, sister, best friend, whoever it is. I mean, we care about them. We love them. We want the best for them. That's what we can give to nature. Like, through enhancing our connection with nature, not only are we getting benefit psychologically, physiologically, but we're actually protecting it, because we don't want to see that patch of trees in that park get torn down for that new high rise or what have you, right? So we're protecting it. We're engaging with it. We learn about it. We start to actually realize that the squirrel that's in your backyard is the same squirrel that's in your backyard every day. I think there was, again, my shift was I remember never thinking about that, right? Of course, I grew up with lots of squirrels, so it was hard to keep track, but moving into a city, it's there's a squirrel with the little gap in his tail, or there's the squirrel with the white tip on his tail, or there's that really little squirrel that's really spazzy, right? You actually get to know them, and you start talking to them, right? And same thing with trees and that. So it's just, and they have messages. I mean, that's just it. They have a life force and they have an energy about them. And by sitting there and, again, clearing our head and holding questions that, something that you might be working on with yourself, or a rough situation with somebody at work, but by what can I do about this person at work that's giving me a hard time, or we're having disagreements, taking that in, asking that question, taking it into the forest or your local city park, and just kind of dropping it, and just be conscious, be mindful about nature. And then all of a sudden, just kaboom. I mean, again, I talk about studies with creativity and all the things that can come from nature, right? So I think if we're doing it in the best way, we're doing it in a mutually beneficial way. It's always reciprocal. And honestly, when it changes your mindset, and this is probably why I write, because I can hit delete when I write the word usury, because again, that is who I am. And it's the way, at least with looking at therapy, we're looking at kind of using nature. So anyways, but yeah, I think it's just, it's interesting is all that we do use those words of using, and the separation of nature is part of that, I think, as well. So, yeah.
So what you're saying is one of the biggest things we can kind of give back is that recognition, that awareness of nature, right? Just paying attention. Of course. And I absolutely, like you said, if just think about it in terms of a human relationship, nobody wants to be ignored.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yet here we do. We ignore nature all the time. We just pass by that tree. We might see a squirrel, but we never give it any more thought.
For sure. No, and I could even go farther with that. And I'm glad that's exactly what I'm saying. And I think I could give another example. And thinking of a hawk. I was out in my tree stand one day hunting deer, and there was a hawk that decided to jump down on these cute little squirrels that I'm watching frolic in the forest, and basically took that squirrel's life. And that was food for it, right? And I think we start to get a really healthy perspective on life on Earth from interaction with nature, from realizing that we are part of nature, right? I mean, I'm out there hunting deer, so I'm obviously aware of the whole life-death thing, but by connecting with nature, I think it humbles us, because it really does show us who we truly are, right? We are part of this, and we will die one day. And I think it's just a lesson right now, as people get back in touch with nature throughout this, throughout the lockdowns and stuff, people going outside for even just, their allotted time or what have you, or just totally just using all this time off to just spend all day in nature, right? Those are my kind of people. but because that's just it. In that time, I think we're getting the healing that we all need. And as you're asking what to do about, going forward in society. And I think we all have to just do our individual part. But if we can all take whatever that is, what our individual part is, and take that into nature, we're going to get rewarded with, again, by focusing our awareness and attention on nature, we're going to get information back. And it's a feedback loop that we've been a part of long before we were writing books and doing scientific experiments. So we've got to just people have asked me a lot throughout the pandemic, how do you put your faith or so much stock in like natural medicine and natural health, and you're strong and healthy? It's like, well, one, because of the science, because I look at the numbers and I see how many people my age within, who I am and are getting sick. And I say, no, I'm going to double down on water, drink clean water. Right. So I bought a water ozonator and I was ozonating my water and things like this now. Right. So it's just, nature's always there, I think, for us. And when we start to just remember that we're a part of it, the problems that we seem to run into nowadays, they just aren't there. And I understand a lot of people have suffered this last year. So I don't want to make it seem like I haven't gone through challenges too with this pandemic, but I've really have felt supported throughout the process, because I do know that nature provides. And especially in this last year, I think it's been a saving grace for a lot of people. And I just hope that continues, and we start to all gain greater awareness of that reciprocity that I think is essential for life. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, maybe you've shared so many great insights, reasons to connect with nature, how to connect with nature. Any kind of final thoughts you want to share that have come from your studies, your experiences, that have been real kind of, paradigm shifters for you, or you can see having such a great impact in people's life?
The paradigm shifter, I think, again, like I just said it, and it's just from being in nature. I don't think it matters who you are as a person, or what your personality or what your interests are. You could be like the biggest, baddest South Korean video game champion who, plays all day, every day. But if you get out into, and again, a lot of research of forest therapy going on in South Korea, they're actually outdoing the Japanese now with some of this stuff. And again, it's just like getting out in nature is going to clear the path, I think, for you to do whatever it is that you need to do. And I do highly doubt it is playing video games, but that said, a lot of folks out there, I know they love it. So I won't, again, teach their own, but that's just it. I think it's just, for me, it was getting out in it and just like being open to the fact that we don't know everything about nature, right? And if you sit outside, I hunt deer. So sitting quietly in a tree stand for hours on end, you start to learn a lot that you just couldn't from a textbook or a David Attenborough like documentary. As good as those documentaries are and everything, from a, entertainment, I guess, aspect sometimes, but it really is. It's just about, I think, getting out and being in nature, being quiet, doing some of these practices that, you talk about, that I talk about on the podcast, and just giving them a try with like kind of no ego, just, when you're out in the woods, and it's that whole expression of like dance like no one's watching, right? Because when you dance like no one's watching, that's where you're just going to really let loose and be in the moment. And those moments, like by being in nature and just kind of being in nature, everything else melts away and you just start to feel better. So just, get out in nature. And I'd say just like engage with it, be mindful, and listen to it for sure.
Cool. Well, as simple as it sounds, I know it's profound. And as you're sharing that, it's reminders to me, and it's also bringing up recollections of when I've had those experiences. And and I think you've also shared too, like that spectrum of what is nature. It's relative to each of us in our situation or our circumstance, and not trying to define it and put it in a box. Like lately, I've just been doing a ton of gardening, that is nature. Even though I'm kind of still in the city and it's not like deep in the woods, all those positive beneficial effects are there. So
right. No, gardening, I'm glad you said gardening. Gardening is definitely a great one. And there isn't that much research on gardening, but that said, more people love connecting with, when looking at how people connect with nature, people really do love gardening. So getting out there and learning where your food comes from is yet another really great way to enjoy nature for sure.
Yeah, cool. All right. So if folks want to connect more with you, and like we mentioned it as we first started off, so you got a great, fantastic podcast, Rewild My Bio. You can go to rewildmybio.com. That's Shawn's website for the podcast. He's got his blog up there too. Anywhere else you want to direct people so they can connect and learn more about your work?
No, that's just about it. The website works well. I've got a newsletter there that I am going to get back to here now that I'm finished that paper, and that's really it, because I think in this day and age, I don't who knows how long Instagram will be around, things like that. So I really do want to stay in touch with folks and start letting them in on all the stuff that's going on up on the land there, and hopefully be getting the house and a yurt and the whole deal for a lot of nature therapy going on here. But yeah, no, that's about it.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for spending the afternoon with us, sharing your insights into your world. And I really appreciate it. So we'll look forward to chatting again soon. And folks can head over to rewildmybio.com and all the other platforms to connect with you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Shawn.